If you run VSL funnels to acquire clients and your VSL funnels are sucking this year, then make sure you watch this video to the very end. I'm going to break down why they're sucking, what you can do to fix it, and how that all plays out. So if you're not familiar with me, my name's Damon. I'm a fractional CMO. I've consulted with hundreds of businesses over these last couple of years, seen behind the scenes in terms of like what's working, what's not working. And I see a lot of the same trends show up time and time again. So if you are having issues with your VSL funnels, I'm 99% confident I know what the reason is, and I'm going to break down that right now. So, why are most people struggling with VSLs in 2025? Now, there's a couple reasons. One thing to keep in mind is people today are making decisions based off of what worked in 2022 or 2023. And you have to factor in market sophistication. Shit changes. People change. People get screwed. People have less trust than they used to have. That's really the biggest factor that's going on here. Trust has gone down. And you have to be able to navigate a new environment that we are living in nowadays where people are just not as trustful. If you run a VSL funnel, I remember running VSL funnels back in like 2020. Costs were super cheap. We'd get people on the phones. It's $50 to book a call with people who actually have money. They show up at like 80%, and then, your close rates are pretty solid on top of that. That is just not the world we're living in anymore. I don't really know a lot of people hitting those metrics nowadays, but you have to just factor that in. Like, we're living in a different time period, and things that used to work 3 years ago or 5 years ago are no longer working. But that being said, there's a couple things we have to optimize for. The biggest reason why I see a lot of people struggling with VSL funnels is because they don't know what to optimize for. Everything they are doing is surrounding cheap costs. Everyone cares about costs. They want the cheapest cost per lead. They want $5 leads. They want $20 booked calls. And what a lot of people don't realize is like that's all bullshit. That doesn't matter. It's like it's a total waste of time. It matters if people actually close. If I bring in 10 billion leads for $5 a piece and no one closes, what is the point? It doesn't matter. You have to look at what generates the highest return. And a lot of times what generates the highest return is not the cheapest costs. Sometimes it is, but in most cases it's not. Usually your quality of traffic is correlated to the cost you're paying for it. So that is the key issue that I see a lot of people doing. They're optimizing everything for cheapest cost. They want the cheapest cost per lead. They're cutting campaigns that are outside their cost KPIs. They're setting their cost KPIs too low. They're setting, say, $100 per call and cutting everything that's above that. You're optimizing for the wrong thing. So let me go ahead, get my trusty Google Doc up on the screen. This is how I look at it. This has made my business and me and my business partners, close to $10 million this year because I run funnels and I optimize for these things. So first and foremost, number one thing I optimize for is ROAS, return on ad spend. If I spend $1, how much do I make? If I have a campaign and the ROAS is solid, the ROAS is 4, 5, 6x, I don't care what the cost is. I don't care if it's $500 a call. That's irrelevant. If I'm able to spend $1 and make 5, why would you not continue to do that? I have this conversation with people on a weekly basis. It annoys the living fuck out of me. But if I'm able to spend $1 and make 5, and I could just spend more money, instead of spending $1, I'm going to spend $1 million and make $5 million. That's a $4 million profit. Now, obviously, like, businesses have expenses. 15% goes to the sales team. You got your HubSpot accounts, you got your office, whatever it is. But like at a high level, if ROAS is good within each individual campaign, I am going to scale that bitch to the fucking moon. And anything other than that makes no sense whatsoever. It makes zero sense. If the ROAS is good, you scale it. If the ROAS is bad, you cut it. Now, granted, like, we have to factor in early stages in a campaign. If we're looking at like a longer sales cycle, if you're selling high ticket, it's not like e-commerce where, you're getting that like 1 day attribution window. It's not like a drop shipping product where it's like they hit the page and they either buy or they don't buy. A lot of times if we're selling like a, $25,000 plus service, it might take 21 days. It might take 30 days. And you have to factor that in from an attribution tracking standpoint. It's like if we have expensive costs in those first few weeks, then, it's possible deals will come in. It just may be on a delayed sales cycle lag, basically. That's where this gets kind of gray area. But at a high level, if campaigns have good ROAS, but I define good ROAS as like 4x. Now that's very industry dependent, very niche dependent. But ROAS good, scale. ROAS bad, cut. Super simple. Don't fuck around with this. Next, CPA to LTV. So CPA meaning cost per acquisition. How much does it cost us to acquire a client? LTV meaning what do we make over time? Now, people go back and forth on this. A lot of my teams only do a PIF only model. We don't have a lot of recurring revenue. We don't do a lot of payment plans. So I would say, this could be swapped out with upfront cash per unit. But at a very, conservative level, I like to make sure my cost per acquisition to my LTV is at bare minimum like 3 to 1 or 1 to 3. I suck at equations. But if we are making $30,000 LTV from each client, I don't want to pay more than 10K. That's kind of my cap. I want it to be under that, ideally, like for averaging 30K, ideally, more like 7K in that range. So we're closer to like 4 to 1, I guess. But basically, like if you want to run the numbers on your CPA, your LTV, how much you can afford to pay for the client, make sure you factor in also your, all the other metrics on your P&L. Because like that CPA, that's really only factoring in, like, I believe the definition of that is like ad spend divided by units. So if I spend $100,000 per month on ads and I bring in 100 new clients, my CPA is $1,000 in that case. But, we have to factor in things like sales team commission, other things on the P&L. You obviously have other expenses outside of just ads. So you need to factor those into that equation and determine what is a realistic CPA that you can afford to pay relative to your LTV. If that number is good, keep it going. So the reason I bring this up, how this relates to VSL funnels, is you'll have, if you're running like an established offer, if you do $1 million a month on an offer, chances are you're running more than one funnel. There's a good chance that you'll have various funnels going at any given time. And if one funnel has a better CPA to LTV, like I want to focus on scaling that funnel or focus on like making those numbers better on the other funnel, because it's good to have multiple funnels in my opinion, just to diversify risk. But, we want to focus on like getting those numbers good. That's your benchmark of sorts. Like your better funnel where you have the better CPA to LTV, that is your benchmark, and you want the other funnels to get on pace with those numbers. So that's the second thing I look at. Third, percentage of qualified leads. So a lot of people don't do this and they are losing a lot of money because of it, but you need to get this set up. So you need to have tracking set up surrounding qualified leads. Simple way to do this, put inside your type form, have a basic set of qualifying questions or disqualifying questions, I guess you could say. People who qualify, we need some sort of tag in there that signifies they are a qualified lead. Usually they just like get tagged in GHL or, they hit the thank you page, or I mean, not the thank you page, they hit the booking page, versus people who are not a qualified lead. Maybe they don't have the finances, maybe they don't meet the timeline, maybe they're the wrong industry. They are marked as a disqualified lead, and then they can't book or whatever happens. Some people go back and forth on that, but basically you just need a way to differentiate qualified leads versus disqualified leads. Now, if I'm running multiple funnels and one is producing more qualified leads than unqualified leads, that's important, because like I don't want to just blow cash on people who are unqualified. Now, granted, keep in mind the hierarchy here. This is below this. Like if I'm running two funnels, and I call this MQL percentage, marketing qualified lead percentage, by the way, just for clarification. Like if one funnel is getting a lower MQL percentage, like less qualified leads are coming through that funnel percentage-wise. Like let's say I have one funnel, for every 100 leads that come in, 50 are MQLs. I have a second funnel that for every 100 leads coming in, 75 are MQLs. In theory, like I want the one with 75 because that's 50% more people coming through that funnel are qualified. Now, granted, sometimes it just doesn't work out that way from a ROAS standpoint, from a CPA to LTV standpoint. I've seen that a lot on funnels where I do like VSL as an ad. Our MQL percentage is kind of bad, but the ROAS on the campaign is still better, so I prioritize the ROAS. But this is a factor to consider, is like those percentage qualified leads coming in. So these are my main things that I'm analyzing. I always want to optimize surrounding this. If you're optimizing for cost per lead, cost per book call, you're going to get cheap, shitty traffic in that's not going to close. That's kind of the best way to put it. Okay, next, I know I just said the opposite of this, but I do factor these into the equation. I kind of mentioned this earlier in the video, but sales cycle, you got to account for sales cycle. So if I'm doing creative testing and every single creative I put out, if my average sales cycle is say 21 days, and I'm spending $500 per campaign, like I'm not necessarily going to run that for the entire 21 days, because that means I am blowing at $500 a day on that campaign. I am going to blow about $10,500 for every single creative test. That can add up. If a campaign comes out the gate and the costs are just like egregious, I run it for 4 days or 7 days and it's like $800 per call or something, and there's no closes, like I'll probably clip that one. Same with cost per book call. In the early stages, I am going to look at the cost per qualified lead, the cost per book call. If those numbers suck, I am going to definitely consider cutting them. Now, you have to keep tabs on things downstream. It's possible like a few weeks later, you might have a lead come in that closes and they came from one of those campaigns that you clipped. That might be a good reason to turn that one back on in that case. But these are tertiary priorities. Like these are the primary ones. These are what I focus on. This is secondary. If that's good, but it's less important than this. It's more important than this. This is tertiary. I focus on this after I focus on these. That's how I'd like to look at a VSL funnel. There's a lot of other metrics to track, VSL watch time, stuff like that. I don't really care about that too much, to be honest. But this is at a high level what I'd recommend you focus on. So hopefully this makes sense. I'm going to definitely be dropping more videos like this over the coming weeks, so make sure you hit subscribe. Also, I am going to drop a link to my personal email list. Got a free course in there for you. Feel free to subscribe to that list. Check that out. So thanks for watching. Drop me a subscribe, and I'll be putting out more like this very soon.